Hey, I'm Pascal from Orangepixel, and this is the final episode in the series of diving into source code, or whatever I called it. Today we're going to dive into Space Grunts 2 source code, a turn-based roguelike deck building card. And if you're following my channel for a while and following my games, you know I like to mix and match different genres into one game. And for this, I thought it would be interesting to do a turn-based game like the original Space Grunts, but add something like deck building and card battling, and I think it actually turned out pretty well. So we're going to dive into that source code in a bit. Like I just said, it's also the last episode for now of this TechTalk series. I know a lot of you like it, but it's also been a lot of work diving into the source code, and I think I covered pretty much all the important stuff for my games. If anything is missing, let me know in the comments below. Eventually I will do another series on the TechTalk Tuesday, but for now this is going to be the final one. And for me it's actually interesting to see, because Space Grunts 2 was released in 2019, 2020. Very pretty new source code for me as well. If you compare that to the first episode where I showed you Gunslugs, which was 2011, so more than a decade old. It was a very small game. I was building smaller games and they had to be released much faster, so the source code for Gunslugs was messy, as a lot of you pointed out. And the source code for this, for Space Grunts 2, is a lot cleaner. It's better organized, mostly because my games just got bigger and bigger, and at some point you will actually automatically start making certain choices that make source code easier to read when you're gonna be spending 9 or 10 months on a project, instead of maybe a Gunslugs that was built in 2-3 months time. So there's a big difference there. It's also fun to see that just the stuff that goes into Space Grunts and the stuff that goes into Gunslugs. I kind of hope that you enjoyed this series. So for now we're going to dive into Space Grunts 2, and after the intro I'm going to show you the source code, and we'll have some fun with it. Alright, so I'm not gonna go into all the details for this game. Explained in previous episodes that all my games are pretty much based and built on the same ideas and concepts. So this entity, bullet entities, entity sprites, special effects entities, things like that, explained in previous videos, they are the same in all my games. But of course the details change, the type of explosions, the type of special effects, those change, but how they are handled and how they work are pretty much the same across all the games. We do have a level editor in Space Grunts 2, and it's actually used, even though the game does procedural generation for the whole area, the whole game level. We have an editor, and in that editor we create templates, and these templates are a bit different than my previous games. Pretty much they are split into the amount of exits a room has. So these are all the level templates that have one exit. The game engine will rotate these rooms 90 degrees based on the direction we are generating a room in. So I always design them with the gap at the bottom, with the gap at the top, and then just fill them in with various things. Here we have some hidden walls and secrets, or these are not used, but that's pretty much template 1. Then we have template 2, which has 2 exits, so an exit at the top, an exit at the bottom. And again, also these templates are used by rotating them 90 degrees, depending on which direction the level generator is building. We have templates that have exits at the top, the bottom, and on the right, so 3 exits. And we have template rooms that has 2 in a corner, so at the top and the right. And again, rotating them gives us all the options we need. And then finally we have rooms that can be entered from all directions. And using all these template blocks and these design templates, the level generator builds out this whole layout, this whole maze that you can walk around in by just simply and quickly using certain templates depending on how many exits we want in a room, and then rotating the templates based on where do we enter and where do we want to exit. So it took a little bit of time to figure out if this was possible. Hadn't done it like this before, but it actually made a lot of sense once I started creating these templates and used the code. And so the levels that are generated with this whole stuff is I think very interesting. And if I'm gonna do another game, maybe Heroes of Loot or something, I might use this exact same code. Now that I figured out how to do all this, it would be very easy to just copy it, re-implement it in Heroes of Loot, or for example, and do it again like this. So a lot of variety is possible, and even in this template we can just create certain things just randomly. So everything you see here in red has a 33% chance of being spawned, and these darker ones have 50%. So a lot of stuff is left to the level generator, while we make sure that the walls are solid and the way the player can move and the pathway is always clear and functioning and connected. That's the most important thing when creating mazes. So the level editor is built into the game, but it's not accessible by anybody else, just by me. But like I said last week with Ashworld and a few other games, I like to implement level editors into the game. You have all the graphics there already, you have everything you need is in the game. So the level editor isn't even a big class, it's very simple. It just sets up all the icons that you need for creating certain elements. It's like a very trimmed down tile map editor that is specifically written for me and the purpose of this game. So having all this card battle mechanics in the game, as you can see, a lot of the game code is actually living inside various user interface screens. I think that's the cool stuff about having a turn-based game. You can go crazy on interface stuff and do a lot of things because it doesn't have to run at a very high pace, because usually you're just pausing the game, nothing's changing, and you can just go crazy on the interface. And this class, the UI cards, is pretty much assembling or creating the image used for a card. This class pretty much creates a sprite that holds the information for that card, so the item or the image on the card, the amount of points it has, the type of card it is, all that stuff, the name, it's just pre-rendered into a sprite of its own, a texture of its own. I think we have a method here that says pre-render. So we render everything on a frame buffer of itself. This card has its own little frame buffer. We set it up, we then render the whole card onto it. And this function is also callable from within the game, so you don't have to pre-render it, but it obviously saves a lot of time and precious cycles if we pre-render all these cards. So pretty cool, was a lot of fun to figure out how to do it. And then besides the UI cards, we have the UI deck, which pretty much takes care of all the card handling. So whenever you're bumping into an enemy or an obstacle or something you can interact with, your hands of cards shows up, so all the cards you can play at that spot. You can pick a card, slide it up, you can zoom it in a little bit, especially on mobile, very interesting to have, because sometimes these phones are very tiny displays, so you want to zoom in on the card, and then you can move it to where you want, and that's all handled by this class. And when it's called from anywhere in the game, it will specify the allowed type of cards, because sometimes you can only play attack cards, sometimes only defense cards. So that's all specified, and it then checks the whole hand of the player and shows the cards that the player has in its hands that qualify for this part of the game. So all handled in one big class. It's pretty big, I guess, but it does handle almost everything, including showing special effects when a certain card is highlighted. It has a little glow around it, or various effects are just, everything is handled in this. So even though it's a little interface class, it pretty much is the core of the game, and it takes care of most of the work. For all these other interface classes, there's not a lot of weird stuff going on here. We have the map view, pretty much like the name suggests, it renders the whole map but slightly smaller so that it fits on the screen. We have the menu class, pretty much shows the menu to the player, the options in there. We have the perma cards, and those are unlockable cards that will permanently change or modify the gameplay for you. It will just show a bunch of UI cards, and I should show you what these UI cards are based on actually. So showing a card is interesting, but what defines the card? And I think we have a whole list of items for this card. Yeah, so that should be in globals. As explained in previous episodes of this, I put a lot of stuff in the globals. So over here we should have all the tutorial events, triggers, entities, trinkets, and I'm not seeing. All right, all these items, in all my other games they are pickup items. Also in this game they are pickup items, so you'll see a zapper, a phaser 2. These are the various type of weapons you'll see, and you can pick them up, and as soon as you pick them up they will also turn into a card. So these are all the items you can find, and here are all the properties defining these cards. And again, like in previous games, you can put all this in data files or text files or whatever, but for me, I quickly come up with an idea, I just put it in this array and then I work it out and I check it out and it functions. And I don't really see the extra need to put it in a data file unless you want to somehow be able to modify the game or have somebody else do the game design on all these special items, because then they can easily change it without having to change the code. But since I'm the only one working on these games, for me it's just as easy to change the code or change the data file. So if I ever decide to make it moddable or a game moddable, I will just dump all this into a data file and it will keep on working the same way. But for now, for this game, it was just all built into an array, and that just defines what every item is, unlock levels, drop rates, type of action, usage type, that all define how the card will look, the amount of points a certain card has, and all that stuff is built into this array. And from one of these lines, we build a card in the UE cards. So pretty cool. And then we have special items. I think they are here. Right, we have things like pure, so that should be defined all the way down here. Skill, perma, passive, this defines the type of card that it is. These are permanent and perma unlockable cards, and they are passive. We have technology cards, attack cards, and that's all defined here. You can see the difference in this more current game, more modern game, compared to the first episode where I showed Gunslugs, a game that's been well over a decade old. It was very messy, but here it's a lot more clear what's going on, because I've grown as a game developer, and it also became more important to do these things because my games gotten bigger and bigger. So if you're writing bigger games, you should try to make things as clear as possible. For smaller games, I still think if you just want a quick game and want to quickly develop it, nobody's gonna care how your source code looks. Just make it, get it up and running. That's pretty much still what I try to do with small games. Anyway, that's all the cards, and skills are also cards. You see the UE cards is everywhere. That's what you get when you try to create a card deck building type game. A lot of stuff is handled with cards. And that brings us to the world generator. World generator is just what I still call it. Even in Procedural, it's called world generator. It's almost every game you open has a world generator these days. This is where the level gets generated. Here we have a bunch of variables that can change a certain level, define certain things. Does a level have alien spiders? Does it has armory, a certain special type of armory? Wall critters, little spiders that crawl out of a wall. They don't happen on every world or every planet, but this is all defined here. If it does have those things, here you can see the world has features. So for every world, and even though the worlds are random, the worlds in this case are more progression levels. So level 0 doesn't exist. It's probably used for the menu, I'm guessing. This is level 1, level 2, 3, 4, 5, 14 levels, different levels before you reach the end, or different worlds. I think 2 levels per world in this case. So here we define all the variables and settings and options that a certain world has, because you don't want alien spiders walking around everywhere. And as you can see, the first world has very few features because that's where the player gets into the game. So we don't want to throw everything at him. We want to save that for later levels. And if you want to balance the game a little bit, all these things could be changed a little bit. We could add some extra things, and that makes levels more difficult. Again, this could also be put in a data file for modding the game. So if I ever decide to make this game moddable in the future, I would have to dump just a bunch of these things into data files and read them from data files, or don't even have to dump it. I can just check for data files. If they are there, we overwrite the information with that's in the game with the data from a data file. And then we have moddable game in some way. Well, a lot of preferences. Do we want this? Do we want that? These are all the world preferences, and depending on graphic style, certain features get lost and other features get added. And once we have all that set, we start building the level, and max room count is, I think, a random number. Do we want a very big level, then we just put max room count at 64, which would be a huge level. If we just want to get into the game, so the first level is probably more like 10, 12 rooms, I think. And then we just start building the world. And the template is pretty much one room. So the template you just saw is one room. And then imagine a huge amount of rooms next to each other, a huge amount of rooms on top of each other. So one huge grid, and we start filling in, starting at a random spot in that grid. So that first room is always going to be a room with one exit, because that's where you start and you only need one direction to go into. From there on, depending on the rotation, we build to the room next to it. If we then put a template with 2 exits, we have to first do the path that's not the main path, so we can start working on something like a special room or something. And then we also have to work from the other side because we have 2 directions. So that way the whole level template fills up with rooms, depending if there's still room for stuff, because at some point you'll run out of rooms. And then the level editor will just, the level generator will just quit, and we have a level. And that brings us to the main class, the canvas. This is where everything boots up and starts. And a few episodes ago I told you about my wiki generation code. Again, in Space Grunts 2 there's just wiki generation code. It will take all the information about all these cards, and let me show you how that looks in the wiki on the Orangepixel page. We have Space Grunts 2, and here we have the cards. All these cards are UI cards, which I just explained. It renders this whole image and an icon in it, the name of it, description, the points, and all those images now get dumped into a wiki HTML page, and this is all coming out of all the information that we have in the arrays and all that stuff in the game. So a wiki generator, and I'm gonna be building one for Residual pretty soon, probably, because Residual has so much stuff in it right now. I don't even remember everything, so that's why I create these wikis. Sometimes I build another game into a game, and in this case, just in case a game really fails and there's a lot of work going into something like this, so you might just want to reuse it for another game. And in this case I wanted to see if it would work for something like Heroes of Loot 3. So I created a bunch of different graphics already. The name is still wrong, but this is the warrior, this is the elf, this is the Valkyrie. So pick a card and blah blah and play. And we're running around in a dungeon. So a bunch of stuff was already changed and updated, and we have a bunch of graphics for Heroes of Loot version, possibly. Just that Heroes of Loot never is turn-based, but as you can see, it's just a very different world. With wood, treasure chest instead of other type of boxes, long sword instead of a weapon. There's a whole set of graphics made, and just in case that Space Grunts 2 would be doing very poorly, we had something up and running. That is the dungeon. We had depth rendering. I'm not sure that's still in the game. Let me see if that still runs. That's another thing I was tinkering with, just to see if it works and if it could be interesting for either this game or maybe a future game. I decided to not use it in the end. It somehow, well, as you can see, it gives some sort of depth, and I've been tinkering with it a lot. It looked a lot better at some point, and then it looked a lot worse at another point, and this is the current version. It gives a little perspective to all the tiles, the furthest being smaller, the front being bigger, and it was an interesting thing. It looks interesting, but I think it also looks very messy, so I didn't end up using it at all. This might just need some refining, and if I had time I'd start tinkering with it again and see if it amounts to something usable. But it's built in the game, just never activated. So I always try a lot of extra things, and a lot of that stuff doesn't end up in the game, but it's always a good learning experience, and sometimes it amounts to just a completely different and new game. Other times it's just a little bit of a waste of time, but you'll at least know that it didn't work out. So I think that's pretty much everything about Space Grunts 2. There's not a lot of weirdness going on. It's a turn-based game, card battling, so the cards are really the most important thing in the game. Everything else is just simple top-down stuff. So that's Space Grunts 2. Alright, and that's it for this whole TechTalk Tuesday series of diving into source code. I hope you enjoyed it. It's really a lot of fun to just show you highlights of my source code and certain things. I can go into specifics, but you're probably using other languages or other engines or tools, so it's not going to be very interesting. This is just more to give you a global impression of how certain things are built in games that are commercially released and are profitable, which I think is also an important thing to mention. These games, they are all built in a certain time, and that shows and reflects in the source code, but there's also that they had to make a certain amount of money, and you have to balance all those things if you want to start doing commercial games. So hope this series was interesting for you, and I'll be back with another TechTalk series at some point. I'm currently thinking about doing a pixel art TechTalk Tuesday, where just you give me some ideas and I'll just draw that one and talk about the whole process of why I'm drawing certain things and coloring certain things, and every video will have some sort of pixel art, which I think could be an interesting TechTalk Tuesday series, but we'll see. For now, this is the final one. I'll of course be uploading every Thursday, just talking about residual and game development and behind the scenes stuff of Orangepixel. So hope you liked it. Subscribe, like, comment below, drop on the Discord, and I'll see you next time. All right, bye.